morning. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the start of a new trading day. Let's kick off with our banner story. The World Bank has committed to shell out more than $550 million for 3 projects in the Philippines. The multilateral lender has committed an amount of $300 million for the Philippines Seismic Risk Reduction and Resilience Project. The program has a total cost of $309.5 million. It seeks to enhance the safety of public buildings in Metro Manila and boost the capacity of the DPWH to prepare and respond to emergencies. It also committed $200 million for the Fisheries and Coastal Resiliency Project and $65 billion for civil service modernization. The projects are still in the pipeline, and the World Bank says the commitment for the amount of loans may be modified during the preparation stage. Now, speaking of loans, Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez is urging the Asian Development Bank to expand its loan portfolio to the Philippines and other developing countries to help fast-track recovery. In a report by the Philippine Star, Dominguez told the ADB during the 54th annual meeting of the ADB Board of Governors that the lender must level up and must assist developing economies to bounce back. Now, inflation settled at 4.5% year-on-year in the month of April, the same level we saw in March year-on-year. That is versus a survey of 22 economists by Bloomberg, which yielded a median estimate of 4.7%. Still, prices accelerated from the 2.2% inflation print in April of 2020. You can see that on my chart here. April also marks the 4th straight month that inflation breached the government's annual target of 2 to 4%. The main contributors in last month's consumer prices were food and non-alcoholic beverages, as well as an uptick in transportation fees. Meat also remained a major driver for inflation, with prices jumping 22%. Notably, inflation in NCR clocked in at 3.7%, whereas inflation in areas outside of Metro Manila hit 4.7%, which is above the national average. Inflation for the poorest of the poor slowed to 4.9% in April. That's from 5.5% in March. Still, the poor continued to suffer a higher interest rate compared to the national average due to high food and transport prices conflated with their lower income. Year-to-date, inflation now stands at 4.5%, still exceeding the higher end of the government's target, but April's figure is well within the BSP's 4.2 to 5% inflation forecast for this month. Central Bank Governor Ben Diokno says upside and downside risks of future inflation are balanced, suggesting similar pressures for price growth to accelerate and slow. Health check now on the local unit amid the lower than expected inflation print. Interestingly, that had already ended at a 2-month high yesterday. And take a look at my terminal here now, breaching below the 48 levels. We're now at 47.965 to the greenback, something that analysts have been looking forward to for quite some time here. It took a while for us to get there, but here we are. So the peso yet again strengthening, now more than a 2-month high, so to speak. Let's take a look at our own equities and how we are responding to that inflation print. Interestingly, lower than yesterday, down by 0.3%. Recall that a lot of investors were on the sidelines, according to traders here, specifically waiting for that print. We are now trading at 6337.45. Now, recall that we had also digested the PMI reading for the month of April. That was a contraction coming in at 49. And COL's Juan Desperado is warning that there will be more sluggishness ahead, with, of course, a couple of IPOs draining the liquidity and another possible MSCI down weight. I'm going to go forward to some stocks to be watching out for here, specifically Petron. Recall that we had reported that first quarter profit, which did swing to a profit from a loss last year. Nevertheless, President Ramon Ang is saying that Petron will be resuming their refining operations in the month of June. They also said that they have set aside 11 billion pesos for capex this year. and that the refinery in Bataan has begun to avail of some fiscal incentives from operating in a free port zone. Now, Petron stock up by 1.4%, going against the rest of the tide at 3 pesos and 55 centavos. Now, a couple of builders to be watching out for here. I'll take a look at Megawide. That's as they have just announced that they have signed a 2.9 billion peso deal with their JV partners for the Malolos-Clark Railway. That is with Hyundai Engineering and Dong-A Geological Engineering. So, of course, this is the phase 2 of the PNR Malolos-Clark Railway project, and that will, of course, feature the country's first airport railway express service. Megawide also in the green this morning on the back of that news, up by 1.2%. And finally, more on roads here, taking a quick peek at MPIC as they've now allotted 12.1 billion pesos for specific projects over in the south. Now, recall that they do have a subsidiary called MPT South, and this money will be going to the C5 Southlink Expressway, or the Cavitex, basically, which is extending into a segment 4 and Calax projects. Now, President and General Manager Roberto Aboncha has said that the Calax subsection 5 is targeted to be completed in the third quarter. It's now at a 95% completion rate, and also that once the Calax is completed, that will be serving 45,000 vehicles, hopefully by the end of 2022. However, Metro Pacific going with the rest of the index here, sliding 0.7 points by 1.7% to just over 4 pesos and 3 centavos. Okay, let's check in on the biggest headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Bayanihan 3 bill proponents assure that universal aid will likely benefit poor families who tend to have more household members. Now, in an interview with the chiefs, Congresswoman Stella Quimbo and Sharon Garin explained that it is fair to give assistance to every Filipino since all of us are affected by the pandemic regardless of social class. Quimbo added that their proposal is progressive because it eliminates the need for a list that dictates who among the poor would receive aid.
Pag binibigyan ng selection power ang mga nagdi-distribute, kapag may pilian, lagi nagkakaproblema. Speaker said, two things. Let's make it very simple. And number two, let's make it inclusive. So if we're going to err, let's err on the side of over-inclusion rather than over-exclusion.
Now, in the same program, Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship Joey Concepcion expressed his support for a more fine-tuned rollout of COVID-19 vaccines to the NCR Plus bubble. Concepcion said that doing so would help jumpstart the economy. Now, the Finance Department and the Bureau of Internal Revenue are backing the 2-year extension of the estate tax amnesty that's on the back of facing difficulties in the implementation and below target revenues amid the pandemic. The estate tax amnesty is set to expire on June 15th, and a Senate bill is seeking to extend this until 2023. The Bureau says that those who want to avail of the amnesty are unable to get required documents due to the travel restrictions. Now, so far, the government has collected around 2.5 billion pesos from the over 43,000 who availed of the amnesty. This is well below the department's target of 6 billion pesos. Inflation for the month of April came in lower than analysts had expected, but BSP Governor Ben Diokno is saying that the demand side is actually improving. Here to weigh in, we have with us Danie Mapa, Senior Economist of ING. Good morning, Nikki, and welcome back.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Nikki, very quick reaction on inflation here. So 4.5% versus the 4.7% that was being expected. And we did see the supply side pressures, let's say, easing. Can you say that the policies of the government are now working specifically when it comes to addressing the pork supply issue?
Thanks for having me once again. And you noted that the governor is citing, these supply side measures to combat the current breach in the inflation target. If you look at pork prices, they're still steady at roughly about 22%. Up from the same period last year. So I don't think we've yet to see the impact of the executive order on pork importation. So I think these are, we did see some improvement in fruits and vegetables, but the pork, which is the big issue, continues to be quite elevated. The executive order is yet to kick in.
Okay, are you in favor of the lowering of the import tariffs, not just for pork, but for meat in general in this period when we do need some collections to fund the pandemic response, but at the same time, we do need to arrest inflation?
Yeah, well, I get I support the idea that we need it for this time, just in this particular time, to sort of get a hold of inflation. Inflation affects everybody. Higher pork prices definitely will hurt everyone. So lowering the tariffs just to get in, it's just to normalize supply, I think is warranted at this point. Yes, we're losing some money in terms of revenue collection, but I think the fact that there's less pressure on the BSP to hike, with inflation coming down, that should go a long way in this crisis period.
Where do you see the demand side improving? Do you agree with the statement of the governor?
Actually, if you look at the other components of inflation, now, of course, we have food prices as well as transport. The main issue here, or the main reasons why we saw inflation stay elevated at 4.5%. But there are other sectors of the economy that are showing deflation. Recreation and culture, 9 months now negative 0.6%. And this is just a clear-cut sign that there's not a lot of demand pressure for certain items. So I think, the governor is saying that maybe there's a bit of demand side pressure because the economy is in better shape than where it was last year. But I still think there's not a lot of pressure on the demand side. All of this or the bulk of this breach is still on the cost push side.
Okay, now let's talk about some good news, if you can call it that. Lowercase print, 5683. I don't know if that's good news, but nevertheless, any type of not bad news is positive at this point. We're also getting some positive comments on the vaccine rollout. We've just got news right now that Moderna has now been authorized for EUA. The last time you were here, you mentioned that you had a more conservative outlook, especially when it comes to growth. Are these developments coming in better than expected?
I continue to hold my current view that growth will relatively be subdued. Mere fact that yes, we are limiting, or we're adjusting or modifying our target population for herd immunity, it still doesn't answer the question: do we have enough vaccines on shore? I think if you look at the vaccine supply pipeline, it doesn't look like it's going to be commensurate to hit that. Even if we do target NCR plus as our herd immunity target. So I still feel we're a little behind with regard to vaccine supply. We have the issues now of what's happening in India. So we're definitely going to see some backlog there. You did mention the lower case count yesterday, but I think we have to take that with a grain of salt. 22 or 21 vaccine centers were unable to deliver their results. So maybe that's not representative of what we see right now. So vaccines continue to be scarce, while case counts remain quite high. I think this is a recipe for prolonged lockdowns, or even if we exit from the lockdowns, I think consumer sentiment will remain quite subdued because everyone's going to be anxious about catching the virus.
Okay, so not time to be celebrating yet. Can I get your insights on the interview that we had just rolled with Congresswomen Stella Quimo and Sharon Garin, and this idea of just providing aid to all to avoid, to fast track it basically, and to avoid all of these discrepancies?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a supporter, or pushing for more fiscal stimulus. This is the right way, I think, to deal with this crisis. People have incomes. People's incomes have been distorted because of the pandemic. So a very simple and effective way to get the money out, I think, is what the representatives are after. We saw the issues last year with regard to distribution of ayuda. They didn't have a list. Not everyone was on the list, so it was very difficult to get money to the people that needed it the most. So just having a situation where we give everyone money, but with the opt-out or the option to say, I'll forego my ayuda, I think that's a better way of doing it. Simple and effective. I think that's how we get the money out and into the pockets of those who need it the most.
Okay, so hoping for altruism from other people as well to make this equitable. Now let's talk about fiscal consolidation. There is actually a line that Bloomberg had reported from ADB and IMF warning of premature fiscal consolidation. They had basically said raise taxes only after the global crisis ends. This is definitely not necessarily what's going on here. If anything, it's spurring the structural reforms. Give us your comment here.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the depth of the economic downturn, I think most institutions are going to be understanding of the fact that it might take some time for nations to recover and to get back their fiscal house in order. The pandemic and how it's hit different countries will necessitate a response, a fiscal response, and sometimes we need it to be very forceful and hefty. So, I think some people or most institutions will be very understanding and say, it's okay if you take a little longer to consolidate. You did have to roll out the fiscal stimulus given the impact on your economy. So, structural reforms at this time, I think, I'd say it's laudable in the sense that you carried out something during a pandemic. However, maybe timing issues would also come into play. That maybe you could have delayed it by a year or two until you got the pandemic under wraps before you start to initiate structural reforms that may complicate the recovery process.
Okay, very interesting. So many moving parts here. And finally, Nikki, before we let you go, peso breaching the 48 levels downwards. But some people are saying that basically this is because we haven't imported quite a lot and construction activity remains tepid. But will a strong peso be helpful in any way to the economy right now? How does that relate to I don't know, spurring domestic consumption, for example?
Well, on spurring domestic consumption, that might actually be a negative in the sense that you still have quite a number of families receiving dollars from abroad. A stronger peso, of course, dissipates their purchasing power. But on the import side, this should give at least a little more cushion for importers to bring in, capital machinery and the like with the peso a bit stronger. As you noted, the peso has outperformed the region now, breaching the 48 handle. That is a clear-cut sign that we are not importing enough capital machinery, raw materials. At the same time, we're borrowing foreign currency, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing that strong pickup in the peso the last 2 weeks. That's your euro-dollar bond issuance coming in, helping support the peso. But yeah, we're borrowing in dollars. We're not importing enough because the economy is down. So that's just a recipe for a stronger peso.
Okay, so it might not actually bode well in terms of spurring consumption and demand for the time being. But as you mentioned, possibly positive for cheaper imports if we do need to catch up on that construction build program. Thank you so much, Nikki Mapa, Senior Economist, ING.
Take care, stay safe.
And that's a first look into the business day. Today is Wednesday, May 5th, 2021. Catch Businessworld Live for the market close. That's at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.